I was saying it like, look like the guy from Emily in Paris. And so then I was picturing him and I had to work on fixing that. Like a part of his rib has something to do with something and connects him to something, to the people. I truly actually don't know. Listen though, if someone broke into my house and like, you can only pick one thing to beat my ass with, what are you gonna pick? I'm picking this. I read all 1,000+ pages of Alchemized so that you don't have to. Or if you did, or if you want to, I read it so that we can discuss it. Now I do want to say right now a few things. One, I will be discussing spoilers in this video, so if you haven't read this, maybe don't watch this. And I would say, oh, I'll do a segment without spoilers. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't know if I'm capable of that. Secondly, if you are someone who is incapable of hearing someone possibly have differing opinions than you, one, grow up, and two, click out of this video because I will more than likely say something that you will not like. And let's just save both of our sanities by you spreading your wings and going and finding somebody else. Okay, I'm not gonna hold this up anymore because it's heavy as fuck. I feel like before I get into my full in-depth review, which I'm just gonna say right now is probably going to be quite long because this book, one, was long, but there is just so much to my experience, my thoughts and review on it that I have to say a lot. My little 90-second review that I put on TikTok and Instagram really just scratched the surface or very briefly summarized big thoughts that I have. But before I get into that, let me give you a little backstory on myself and my relation to this book. I am going to be name dropping the fic, the original work that this book was adapted from. The reason why I'm like kind of sharing this and the reason why I'm not super happy I'm doing it is because when I originally got this book, I believe I said in my video of starting it that I wanted to separate the two, that I did not feel comfortable bringing up the two or comparing them, whatever it might be, because I wanted this book to have a chance of standing on its own. However, me having read the original work did have an impact and shaped my experience with this book. Therefore, I'm just getting into it. If you didn't know, this book was originally a fan fiction called Manacled, and I read it for the first time, I think in 2020 during the quarantine. I think it was either like the third or fourth fan fiction that I had read. Then I reread it, I think last year, I reread it in chronological order. That sucked. And both ways hurt in completely different ways. So having read it twice and having read it fairly recently, a lot of the story was very fresh in my mind. Now, like I had said, going into this, I went in with the full intent of not thinking of Manacled or comparing the two because I do still believe that this book deserves to stand on its own. However, the more that I read, the more impossible it became for me to separate the two. I simply could not because the story that the author created, not the world that fic existed in that was written by somebody else, the story that Sen Lin Yu, the author, had created on their own is pretty much the same in this one. And that makes sense. I mean, there's a reason why they had to take the fic down when they got the publishing deal or announced it, but it was so similar that it was impossible for my brain to not think and compare it to Manacled the entire time. Now, I do want to say right now, buying fan fiction and selling fan fiction is illegal. I understand that Manacled has been taken down. If you already have the little version, the EPUB on your Kindle, go ahead and read it. If you have a friend who has it, who can give it to you, sure. But the distribution of it as well lives in this gray space of like it being online or a Reddit. I don't have any thoughts or feelings other than like tread carefully, please, because fan fiction is such a precious thing and community that is constantly in jeopardy because it also exists kind of in this gray space. And when we start to get into the illegal selling and purchasing of it because somebody wants to be able to read the original work, that's just putting not only the author but the entire fanfiction community at risk. So please just don't go and spend money to get a bound version. I know TikTok Shop has a ton, and there's definitely an account that's using a video of me to try to sell their bullshit ass mass produced illegal as fuck fanfiction binds. Please don't buy those. Please don't. And also, if you really want a bound version, join the fanfiction community, make friends with binders. They love to do gift exchange. They'll also happily teach you how to do it. There's so many other ways to do it without putting an entire community at risk. Please, please, please. Okay, back to the review. I went into Alchemized not wanting to think about Manacled, but like I said, the more that I read, the more that I couldn't separate the two. And in some ways, my knowledge of Manacled both hurt and helped me during this story. The way that it helped me was basically through the first 62% of this book. And the reason I say that is because my true investment in the characters and the story and the world was really because and a result of my knowledge of Manacled and wanting to see how they compared and how it played out about and maybe where the author changed things. And around the 62% mark was really the first time where I had true investment in the storyline on its own, because it had veered a bit from Manacled. And so in that instance, I think that my previous knowledge of Manacled and having read it definitely helped me in this case. But where it hurt me was a few things. One, I already kind of knew how the story was going to play out, especially as the more I read, the more similar it was. I went, okay, I'm fairly confident that it is going to play out exactly like Manacled in these certain places. Therefore, things weren't a big shock to me. And so I think that could have played a part in my lack of emotional impact with this book. When I did feel any sort of emotional response, I'm 98% positive it's because I was thinking of Manacled and my experience with it, and reading that for the first time and experiencing those characters go through it, and not because of these characters, which is unfortunate. I do also want to say, yes, I'm going to give a critical review. Yes, I am a critical person when it comes to reading, and this book isn't going to get like a washed down review from me because I went through 1,000 pages. Therefore, I've earned my right to give an honest review. But I do want to say that though I'm going to say negative things about it, things that I didn't like, constructive feedback, one could say, it's not me just hating on this book, because I have seen videos or reviews of people just blatantly hating on it, and you can kind of tell, and granted I don't know them, but you can kind of tell that they went in with the intent of they never wanted to give it a full shot. They didn't really want to like it. And you have people on two extremes of this, right? You have people who you knew were going to love it regardless because they love the author, and that's fine. But you also have people who were never going to like it because they didn't want to like it. And honestly, that side I have more issues with than someone who just like will give a 6-star review to any book written by someone that they love, than someone who will purposefully go in with the intent of not liking a book and then talking shit about it. Okay. I'm existing in the middle, and I feel like I'm kind of in the minority here from what I've seen so far. It's either people DNFing and just being like, this was not good, or people giving glowing reviews, and I am very much in the middle. Right out the gate, I'm going to say this wasn't a bad book, but it wasn't a great one either. In the original story, you have Helena's character. You start out with her. She is a slave. She is given to the High Reeve, and it's just an awful time. And you watch her go through these horrific things, and you know that a lot of her memory is missing, and you don't know necessarily why, and she doesn't know why. You know as much as she does, which ain't fucking much. And that's the same thing here. In this original piece, though, in the present day piece, before we jump into the flashbacks, there is this one thing that I want to discuss that I'm going to try to do so in the most careful, sensitive way possible. But it does have to do with rape. I'm going to try my best here. I do not say this next sentence lightly by any means, and I will give context and explain further, so please don't put down the pitchforks when you hear what's about to come out of my mouth. I think that in Alchemized, Cain raping Helena should have lasted longer. It should have happened more. The reason I say this is because in Manacled, and in this book actually too, the repopulation program and idea does play like a decently big part in the storyline, but also it plays a big part for the reader emotionally later on when we re-enter the present day piece. And I did go back through Manacled to get actual stats for, or like chapters for you, because I didn't want to just like be talking out of my ass here. So in Manacled, Helena's character is first raped in chapter 7. Like right out the gate, we have to go through this. I at first thought I was safe from it. In Alchemized, I was like, oh, we took that out. Thank God. We didn't. We just took a little bit longer to get there. In the original story, it happens first in chapter 7, and then she does not get pregnant until chapter 24. Whereas in Alchemized, she first goes through that in chapter 18, and then by chapter 20, she is pregnant. The reason why I say that I think this should have lasted longer is because not that I wanted to see this character or Cain's character have to go through and endure this for longer than they did, but it felt very glossed over and rushed through. And I don't know what reasonings the author had for it. Maybe they didn't want to have to rewrite all of that and kind of get in the mindset of writing that again, which I can understand. But I think for the sake of the story, for the sake of these characters, and then seeing and unraveling more about them and their relationship through the flashbacks, and then re-entering the present day, it would have benefited in some ways to just have it go on a little bit longer. I'm not saying you need to go from chapter 7 to chapter 24, because that was a lot for me in Manacled. But I think 2 chapters is quite like a short period of time for such like a big thing that does come up later again. Because in the end, you find out that that was Muro's like whole thing and it needed a baby. It felt more like a subplot. And you're like, oh, right, wait, that happened. Obviously, I don't want to have to read about it more than I did. But at the same time, I think something about Manacled, Helena's character and Kane's, for so long had to continuously go over this. Like Helena's character was not getting pregnant and it was getting frustrating. So they're having to do it over and over and over again. It's awful. And as the reader, watching a character go through this, who we've just been kind of introduced to, who we're still getting to know, forcing the readers to sit in that feeling of just absolute fucking dread and disgust and uncomfortable, just oof, would have really had like a strong impact. And I do understand, like, we don't want to go on things longer than we do, but I don't think that the author by any means at any point in Manacled or this story romanticized or fetishized that happening. But I almost feel like how glossed over it wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say not handled it with care or respect, because that's not correct, but it didn't feel like we did it justice by bringing it up chapter 18 and then by 20 it was over. It just kind of felt like, oh, we have to add this in, but I really don't want to discuss it, so we're just gonna like shove it under the rug. Because then when we get back in the present day, it's not really addressed. She then gets her memories back and she remembers everything about her and Kane, and there's this whole thing, like we have a little moment when she like, you kind of see the impact that it had on her to have not only been raped but realized she was raped by someone who she loves. We had that moment, but I feel like there should have been more. It was very glossed over when we came back to it as well, even when that was, we had discovered that that was like a whole thing for the big bad baddie, Muro. It just felt like we should have just taken it out at that point because it wasn't fitting in with the story. It wasn't addressed much. It was like, oh, we're gonna throw it in here in the first like 20%, and then we'll throw it in very briefly in the last 10% of this book, even though it was a big part of the main villain's entire plan. It was the thing that he was looking for. That really did upset me, and then it upset me that I wanted to experience more of it. It was a very odd time for me, but that's just my thoughts on that piece. I just think with the original story, you are in this like disgusted, haunting feeling watching Helena's character go through that. Obviously then in Manacled, when we get back to it, Helena's character, you're brought back to it, but it's even worse because not only do you feel even worse because Helena's character had that done to them by someone who they trust and care about and love, because in my opinion that's a million times worse, but it's also even worse because now you know that Kane, who loved Helena, had to do that and had to hear the things that Helena would say to him, that she hated him and look at with him so much disgust and know that he was hurting her. It made that reveal moment so fucking awful and tragic, and it threw you back into this fucking disgusting feeling you were in the beginning, but like a million fucking times worse because you know the truth of everything, you know the complexities and the layers and the true nature of their relationship. And in this case, because it was so glossed over and brushed over in the beginning and in the end, it didn't do much. And maybe it did for other people, and this is where I think in some ways my review has to be taken with a grain of salt. If you are someone who hasn't read Manacled and you read this, we probably don't have the same opinions, because Manacled, the comparison of, especially emotionally when it comes to my experience of reading it, is so heavily impacted by the fact that I've read Manacled, because I know how I felt when I read the original. I know how I connected with these characters, and when it doesn't even come close to that in this book, it feels like a letdown. I don't think it's entirely fair, and that's why in some ways I think my review should be taken with a grain of salt, because in some ways I'm a biased reviewer, and that's just how the cookie fucking crumbles, unfortunately. But I do know that there were a lot of people who read Manacled who read this book. I also do think in general this book deserved another round of editing. If you're on my Instagram, you know that I have an absolute fucking hateful relationship with the word resonance now. Resonance is the name of the magic system, or it's the name of the magic in this book. I hate the word resonance. It is a harsh enough word, and it's just such a standout word that you can't help but notice it. And it is overused so much in this story, and it's used a lot back to back or in close proximity. And because it stands out so much, you would gloss over the word magic more so, but I still think I would have had an issue with how often they would have put the word magic next to one another. But the thing too that I have an issue with resonance is that I don't fucking know really what resonance is. I know that it's magic, but like what type? And that comes to another issue. But also, real quick about the editing aspect, there was a lot of repetition in general in this story, a lot of repeating of certain words or phrases that another round of editing should have caught. And I don't blame the author for this. I blame the editors for not either catching it the first time or for not doing another round of edits. The things that I have to say about this book, negative wise, I don't fully put onto the author, and I'll explain those moments when I get to them. I'm not putting everything onto the author, though it is their work, it's their creation, but there are times when you're like, your team should have caught this, and your team should have caught how often we use the fucking word resonance. It's used over 500 times. I think it's like 528. I looked it up. And listen, I'm not the only one who felt that way about that word, and thank God, because I thought I was going crazy. I really did. I thought I was like, I need to check myself, but then everyone went, no, me too. I went, thank God. God. The magic system in this book is so fucking interesting, and yet I could not explain it to you. I think the only thing I can explain, and I don't even know if it's correct, is when it comes to the necromancy, Murrow, he gives like a part of his rib has something to do with something and connects him to something, to the people. I truly actually don't know. The magic system was so interesting, but I think it was explained quite poorly. And yes, there are people on TikTok who clearly understood it very well because they're giving extreme explanations on it and explaining it to us like we're kindergartners, as they should, because I need that. But I also feel like if people are having to provide videos going in depth explaining your magic system because other people weren't understanding it, then you did not do a good job of introducing us to the magic system. I'm not saying you need to spoon feed me the entire thing, but it kind of felt in some instances, or most instances, that when the magic system, whatever it might be, also, was it necromancy, alchemy, resonance, do they all connect? I couldn't fucking tell ya. But in most instances, when the magic system was discussed, most of the time, it felt like it was being discussed as if I already have previous knowledge of it, and therefore I was able to fill in the blanks and use context clues to figure out what they were specifically speaking about, but I don't. I'm confused, genuinely, and I did buddy read this book, and I asked if they understood it, and I got a no. So it's not just me. I think a big issue for me specifically with this book was that there were a lot of moments where we were telling rather than showing in places that didn't need to be, and we were showing instead of telling in places that we needed to be just telling me what the fuck was going on. Because you can show me something all you want, but if I have no idea what you're showing me, it means nothing to me. You gotta give me something. In the beginning, I can remember there was a bit of like a decent amount of dry info dumping that I simply did not give a fuck about. And world building in a way was being dealt in an odd way. And I very clearly remember this scene where Helena's like in an elevator. She has this monologue going on about what the building was before. Those pieces of world building, it went on longer than it should have. I don't know how long, maybe a paragraph, longer than it should have, simply because that piece of world building did not fucking matter to me, and it did not give me really any information that was of use when it came to understanding this world. If you were to ask me, like, granted, I can't see things in my head, but I can usually describe the things that were described to me. If you were to ask me, like, what this world looked like, the mechanics of it, the inner workings of the magic system, I got nothing. I know people be brought back to life, and maybe that's just me. Something, though, that the person I buddy read this with and I didn't necessarily see eye to eye on. Something that I so far feel quite alone in feeling is the lack of character development in this book. And I mean this for majority of the characters in this book. So speaking outside of Helena and Kane Farron, I don't give a rat's ass really about any of these other characters. They weren't developed well enough for me to actually care. Lila's character, I could not tell you what her name was until the end when we got back to the present day when her name was said over and over again. I knew Luke's name because the spelling of it when I was physically reading it I was saying it like Luke, like the guy from Emily in Paris. And so then I was picturing him and I had to work on fixing that. Murrow, I finally kind of like went, oh, that's his name, right. Maybe like 40% into the book. They were forgettable characters to me. And I don't think they were meant to be. These are the characters' names that I remember. Kane Farron, Helena, don't know if she has a last name, Lila, Luke, Murrow. Aurelia, I think, was Kane's wife's name. That's what I got. And I know there were a lot more characters discussed a decent amount of times, but I did not give a shit about them because they were not well developed. Now, controversial fucking take, I don't think Helena's character was developed well either. I think the character that we spent the most time developing and kind of deep diving into the complexity of their character was Kane Farron. And that makes sense to me because the author had to show the complexities of this character so that the reader could stop hating them. Because obviously, if you don't do a good job of redeeming that character or just like kind of showing more to them, after everything we read in the present day, you think I'm going to forgive him? Absolutely not. So that makes sense that there was a lot of time and care put there. Helena's character, the reason why I feel like the development wasn't great is because Helena's character was the exact same from the beginning to the end. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I didn't see that much growth in this character. I didn't really learn more about this character. From the beginning, she was, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win this war. I will do anything for my friends. She was very loyal, and those were the same attributes at the end. But none of them really changed that much for me. And this was 1,000 pages, and that was the character I spent the entire book with. I didn't learn more about this character, and my biggest issue was that in Manacled, Helena's equivalent character, you understood why she was so willing to endure so much more than everyone around her who she was fighting alongside with, because we had previous knowledge of that character's like personality and morals and just how they are, that you're like, yeah, that makes sense. That's exactly how she would act in this situation. It would have been weirder if she hadn't. Whereas in this book, I don't know who this character is or was before the war. I don't know, other than the fact that Luke is her best friend, why she would endure so much more than everyone around her. Because you have to admit, like that's the whole devastating part really about Manacled, was that that character was going through so much fucking shit and was so overlooked and just like walked over. You didn't get that as much in this either. I mean, like, it definitely was given a lot of shit, but I feel like in Manacled, Helena's equivalent character was far more like disrespected by people too that should not have been treating her that way. Fucking assholes in that book. But I didn't know Helena's why, really. Other than the fact that Luke was her best friend and Luke was like the leader of this all, I don't know Helena's character and who she is and why she would be that way. I know absolutely nothing about this character before the war, and in some instances I feel like it would have benefited to give me a little bit more of that. Like, we got some things about who she was before, a little bit like with her dad, but not enough. And honestly, the things that I have issues with in this book more so make me upset and sad than like angry, and I'm like, oh, fuck you for making me read this book, I didn't like it. That's not how I feel. I'm just like disappointed and sad because I really wanted to love this book truly, and so I'm just like, I feel sad. I'm like, oh, I do think I might be in the minority here. And that fucking sucks. I fucking hate, like, genuinely, I fucking hate not being on the same bandwagon as everybody else. I want to just fucking enjoy shit. I wanted to bawl my eyes out with this book. I went into this hoping and praying to God that by the time I finished this book, the last few pages would be ruined because my tears would have been all over those fucking pages, and I would need to call off work and make amends with my therapist who I ghosted over a year or two ago. That's what I wanted, and I didn't get it, and I'm mad at myself, and I'm mad at the universe. And now I'm making a very, very long video about this book. This next thing that I want to talk about, I want to give another disclaimer. What I'm about to say, I'm not necessarily putting all the blame on the author. I also don't know what their contract included. It very well could have been a case where the publishers said, hey, we'll give you this book deal, but we want Manacled. Therefore, you must keep X amount % of the book the exact same, down to like exact scenes and lines, XYZ. And so when I bring up the author and things that they have said, I'm not putting the full blame on the author here, because I know there are legalities that go into stuff. Okay, I understand. And I understand the publishers, at the end of the day, they hold the power. The thing that frustrates me, and I know we have this whole thing about separating fan fiction from the new work and how recent books that have been released, that has not been handled well, especially by the publishers and the marketing people. But my thing about it is that the author wants this to be separated from Manacled and from fan fiction, and I genuinely think that the ask of it being separated from Manacled, the ask of that from people who have read Manacled is a ridiculous and impossible ask for us to give you. It's a request that we cannot fulfill because it is so similar. There are exact lines, there are scenes that are beat for beat the exact same. The only thing that's different are the names, and the story is pretty much the exact same. Therefore, you cannot ask someone to be like, hey, look at this photo that I copied but just changed the color of the shirt. But like, you're not allowed to think of the original photo that I just showed you. Like, you have to pretend you've never seen this photo before. It can't happen. There might be some people who have an easier time separating it from Manacled, but everyone that I've spoken to who has read Manacled said that they did not want to compare it to Manacled. They did not want to think of Manacled while reading it, but they were incapable of not thinking about it because it was so similar. It was so close to it. It is essentially Manacled, and there are people that will love it for that because they love Manacled, and that's fine. I think asking for it to be separated from the fanfiction universe, aka the world that Manacled was based off of, yes, because this book right here, if you're not familiar with the world that Manacled was based on or in, you'll be fine. You do not need to know any of that to read this. There is absolutely no reason why you even need to have it in the same sentence as this book because it has nothing to do with this fucking book. However, trying to separate Manacled from this book is near impossible, and I know that's a very fucking confusing and tricky and complicated thing I just said right there, because it's like, well, how can you have one without the other, but you can have this one without that? I fucking get it. The math is very difficult and confusing and it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to me, and I need it to try to make sense to you. Alchemized should never be in the same sentence as the world that spiteful lady created, but you cannot be surprised when Manacled is in the same sentence as Alchemized, which is a slippery slope because then Manacled usually is not able to exist in a sentence without the other. But I'm talking about knowledge and story only, not the likeness of. The reason that I so passionately just went on that rant is because I have seen people try to say that you need to read Manacled before you read this. No, you don't. I actually think you're better off if you don't, because if you do read Manacled before this book, then you will not be able to successfully complete the request that the author is asking, which is for it to be separated from Manacled. And I don't know if what I just said even fucking makes sense, but I hope it did, and it made perfect sense to me. I think I'm a genius. So this book, as we know, is over 1,000 pages, and I don't know how much, but if I had to guesstimate, I would say 800 pages of this book we exist in the flashbacks, and you get 100 in the front and 100 in the back of present day. I'm not entirely sure. I ended up switching to audiobook because it was really the only way I was able to get through this book in less than a month, because I simply did not have the time and I'm not a fast reader. So I don't really know how many pages it was, but I would guesstimate it was 100 pages in the beginning and at the end of present day. So it's 200 pages of present day. I think we could have benefited a bit more from having some more time in the present day in the beginning, and we would have greatly benefited from more time at the end because the ending felt rushed. It felt like we wrapped it up very quickly. I feel like Murrow being taken care of happened like that. The realization of all the memories coming back and things like that for Helena was also quite rushed through and glossed over. And I know there are people who have really emotional reactions to the ending, and here are my few reasons or few thoughts as to why I didn't have it. The first one being, it was rushed. And it both takes a lot and not a lot for me to be emotional in a book. Usually, though, I need to have like a pretty good connection emotionally with the characters. Like, I have to have some sort of investment and want to see them be happy. And it's not that I didn't want to see them be happy, but like I said, I didn't feel like Helena's character, I truly knew her. And so therefore I was like, oh. And then we rushed through also all of it. And I feel like if we maybe slowed down a bit and made us really experience Helena coming to terms with all of these memories coming back, and then also her current state and situation and things that she just had to go through, if I had to sit through that more, I think it would have gotten to me more. The second and the main reason why I think I didn't have an emotional reaction is because I knew exactly how it was going to go. Almost every time a scene started, I went, I know what's going to happen next because I saw it play out in Manacled. Therefore, I've already spoiled the movie for me. I know the ending. I watch movies over and over. The Wild Robot, I fucking love that movie. I know exactly what's going to happen, and it makes me cry every single time. There was an established connection between me and those characters, and I think me not having it with Helena, I wanted Kane to be happy. I did. No, yeah. I was guessing myself for a sec. I wanted Kane to be happy. I think Kane deserved some happiness. And I do think that Helena deserves some happiness, but I also didn't fully buy into their relationship, other than the fact that it was a you're lonely, I'm lonely, let's be lonely together type of thing, trauma bond. I didn't really feel this intimate, all consuming, I will die for you and kill for you love outside of Kane's like possessiveness and outside of like what Helena would have already done for her, like her friends. And I'm not saying friend and familial love isn't strong, but I feel like this love needed to be different with Kane, and it didn't feel any different than what she was already willing to do for everybody else when it came to him. In Manacled, there were a few more like intimate scenes between those two that for me as a reader really solidified for me and made me go, oh wait, no, like these two love each other, like truly love each other. I didn't really feel that with these characters. I believed that Kane, as much as he was capable of after everything he's been through, was in love with Helena. I believed that Helena loved Kane, but I didn't believe that she was in love with him or loved him more than she loved, say, like the people she was already fighting with and for in the beginning, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying that one love is stronger than the other, but I mean, to be willing to do so much for somebody, to endure so much, to forgive so much, you gotta fucking be in love with that person. Maybe I just don't know what love is. Ooh. Ooh, wait. Let's not get into that. But yeah, my emotional reaction, I was so disappointed in myself because I would get emotional thinking about how I felt and my experience when I was reading the ending of Manacled and how much that fucking hurt. But when I would try to just be emotional with what was playing out in front of me, it just didn't really work out. And maybe I'm just a heartless fucking bitch. Apparently I'm, what was I called? Let me pull up. A heartless animal. I've never been someone who will cry a lot with reading. I will cry a lot with like sad videos and movies, and I really do attribute that to not visually seeing things because that is just another way in which I'm not connecting with these characters like other people are. I'm not seeing them, I'm not seeing this stuff play out, I'm just hearing words and I'm trying to think about it. But I've just never really been someone who gets very outwardly emotional with reading books. It'll hurt me inside. And like, it wasn't a happy book. I wasn't happy reading this. I wasn't happy about any of the things happening to people, and I definitely wanted them. I was happy that they were done with things, but I wasn't. Oh, and I got pissed. I'm kind of pissed about it, guys. All in all, I ended up giving this book a 3.5. I was teetering between a 3.5 and a 3.75. I think it would have gone a 3.75 if just there was more editing. That's really where I took a quarter star away. I went into this hoping it'd be at least a 4-star book. A quarter star got taken away because of the things that I discussed, such as lack of world building, the magic system not really being explained to me, what I considered to be a lot of forgettable characters in the book, the rushing, like the pacing being it was so slow for 900 pages, and then the last 100 pages you just rushed through so much shit. That's where that first quarter star got taken away. Where the second one got taken away was the writing, and I don't mean like they're a bad writer, I meant more in the repetition, the overuse of certain things, the telling instead of showing in places when you shouldn't have. It felt sometimes quite heavy-handed with like, hey, just so you know, this person was stabbed, therefore they're in pain. And I'm like, really? I could have never surmised that. Those instances where I felt like some editing should have been done, and if there was another round of editing, maybe it wouldn't have lost that quarter star. And now you're probably saying like, whoa, you never even gave it a chance to be 5 stars? I'm saying I went into it expecting it to be 4 stars or hoping for it to be 4 stars there, and the reason it didn't end up being that is because of these. And then if it had gone above that, I would have told you why. I'm just preparing for people to be pissed off at me, but I actually don't think any of you will be pissed off at me. I don't know. I'm hoping only like 50 people watch this video. All in all, though, I think you need to understand that a 3.5 isn't a terrible rating from me. Let me list off some other books that I've given a 3.5. And the person that I buddy read with, we have very similar tastes and preferences in books. We don't always fully agree on everything, and we rarely give books the exact same rating. And what I will say this is their rating usually tends to be a quarter star or 2 higher than mine. And it's not that I don't want to give it, it's just I have my way of rating shit, and this is just how, as I say, the cookie crumbles. Most books I've read this year I've given 3.5. I gave Vengeful, which is the second book, which is the book after Vicious, a 3.5, and I enjoyed that book, but I had my issues. I gave In the Shadow of the Fall, which is a novella, a 3.5, which is actually a pretty good rating for me for a fantasy novella because there's only so much really you can fit in there. There's gonna be something that's lacking. I gave Dungeon Crawler Carl a 3.5. 3.5 usually for me is I liked it, but I had some issues and I think it could have benefited from just a little bit more TLC. Let me look at all-time 3.5s because that's just my 3.5s for this year. Yeah, I have given 19 books a 3.5. I gave the first Red Rising book 3.5, and I love the Red Rising trilogy. Can you not tell? I gave that a 3.5. A 3.5 is not bad. The last thing I have to say is that I fully believe this author is so capable of crafting such wonderful and probably devastating, brutal worlds. And I am so excited to read another book by them that has nothing to do with the story that I am familiar with, that has nothing to do with the story that anyone's familiar with, that just a story that they get to write that no one fucking knew about. There are no restrictions as to like how much of XYZ they have to keep in. There's no fucking comparison, because I do think that they are capable of doing that and that they will become a stronger writer as they continue. Obviously, this is a debut novel. This is a fucking crazy debut novel. I'm gonna say that. And this is where I can sit here as like someone who writes. This is fucking insane. This is crazy. This book kind of felt like a here damn. Listen though, if someone broke into my house and like, you can only pick one thing to beat my ass with, what are you gonna pick? I'm picking this. One fucking knock to the head and you're dead, bro. End of the day though, I don't think this is a bad book by any means. I don't think it's a great one by my preferences. I think it was lacking in a handful of areas, but I think that there's great potential here. But I am pissed off that I didn't bawl my eyes out. That I didn't even have a single tear in my eye. I don't know how to shut the fuck up. It's a disease. I think I blame my father, you know, because that man loves to listen and he's like, speak. And I do. I think there's one time where I just talked at him for like 2 hours and he just smiled and was happy. And I was like, no, you ruined me. Thank you. Thank you for like loving me and letting me do that. But you've ruined me because now I don't know how to shut the fuck up. And not everyone wants to just listen to me. And this is where I think I should just like have an actual podcast. Cause I'm not, no, I'm not doing that. I haven't even made a booked and writing video in a long time. I can't fucking do that. I'm gonna go start a new book because I've been reading literally only this book for 3 weeks or something like that. And peace and love, but war is over for them and for me. I must go.